Thank you. I think most of us are familiar with the Lake Area Tech logo. It's a stylized globe, you may not have known that, with great font that attracts the eye. And then a very simple branding statement, it's your world. I don't know about you, but I've never really understood what that means. Though I don't think that that's a problem. I think it's subjective. I think it's up to you to determine what that means. And given the great success of Lake Area Tech in attracting great students like those in this room, and providing real-world skills to its graduates, and getting national attention while it's at it, who am I to challenge the marketing of Lake Area Tech? That's not my job. What I want to do today, though, is I want to take the sentence, it's your world, and I want to turn it into a question. It's your world? And in order to do that, I'm going to tell you first that I was a teacher for 37 years, or almost 37 years. But I got my first camera when I was 12 years old. So I've been doing photography for 50 years. So it's as a photographer that I'm going to ask that question. And specifically what I want, this may sound kind of heavy, but I want to talk a little bit about whether photography reflects reality, whether it reflects a form of manipulation, or whether it is art, or maybe all three of those things, or maybe none of those things. And maybe we'll have answers to those questions by the end of this. So let's talk about photography as reality. I have my little point and shoot camera here because my other camera is way too big. But I have this idea that when I turn my camera on and I take a picture, you look marvelous. That I've captured a moment in time. I've captured a piece of reality in doing that. And I don't know if you'd want to argue with that, but I'm going to suggest this. Imagine that we are standing here, that you're standing next to me in this room, which is in St. Paul. And you would think that we would all see this the same way, or just looking at the picture, that we might see it the same way. And specifically, you might say, well, color is color, right? I mean, we see green and red and all of those things. Well, I'm going to say wrong, and here's why. If you're a dog, now I know that there are no dogs present, right? But if you're a dog, you see the world very differently than most humans. You see 10,000 colors, and that's because you have a red receptor and a blue receptor in your eye. You have two. It's called dichromatic, and I don't want to get too scientific here. And so you see the world in muted shades of red and blue. Well, there may not be dogs present, but there's a statistical chance in the size of the group there's a colorblind human present today. And you see the world, and I'm not trying to insult you if you're one of them, you see the world kind of like dogs do, which is to say that colors are muted, the colors are different. And by the way, men are much more likely to be colorblind than women. But the thing that's interesting about colorblindness is that you don't know you're colorblind, because after all, it is your eyes, and therefore it is your world that you're seeing through those eyes. The person next to you can't say, well, you're not seeing what I'm seeing. And for the most part, you don't know you're colorblind until you're tested. I know one person that I talked to recently that's colorblind didn't know until he was about 20 years old. He thought the world was as he saw it. Well, most humans, about 90% of us, see the world with three receptors, red, green, and blue. That's 10 million colors. Cameras like the one that I just held up, and screens, and the screens on your phone, are all trichromatic, which is to say that they register or reveal red, green, and blue, just the way the human eye does. So the camera is tuned to 90% of humans. And you think that humans would be at the top, but we're not even close. I give you my friend the cockroach, and all of his good friends, the other insects in the insect world, they can see 100 million colors because they have 4 color receptors. Okay, that's cool. But here's something that's really cool. 12% of females see the world like insects. I call them superwomen. Because they see 100 million colors. And statistically, there's a good chance that someone in here, female, is tetrachromatic. But you're just like the colorblind man. You don't know it unless you've been tested, because it is your world through your eyes. Butterflies and pigeons see 10 billion colors. That's with a B. But for the prize, I give you the mantis shrimp, who has 12 color receptors. Most humans have 3, they have 12. I can't say much more about what they see with all those receptors. I can tell you that I'm happy that superwomen and butterflies aren't in charge of the paint section at the home store, because I think that it's overwhelming as it is. I went looking for gray about a year ago. You think that Menards has 50 shades of gray? Not even close. But what this really means is that if you stand with me in front of this flower garden, and I have next to me a superwoman, and I have a colorblind man, and a butterfly flies through, and I hold a manna shrimp up because his legs are short, we're all not seeing the same garden. So the question would be, well, what is the real garden? So you could also say that it's your world. I would say whatever that means. What about photography as manipulation? Now, I'm going to suggest at the outset that all good photographers are master manipulators. And there's nothing wrong with this kind of manipulation, by the way. We often think of that as a negative, but I'm going to show you an example of it being a positive. But before I do that, I'm going to tell you that all photography, just at its core, is a manipulation, because you think you're looking at a replica of the eye in this photograph, which was taken just over by those windows a few years ago. But what you're really looking at, though you can't see it, but trust me, they're there, are a whole lot of little squares. In fact, in this particular frame, there are 16 million of those little squares, each of which is tuned to register red, green, and blue. So if you get really, 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 really close to this, you'll see the squares. You probably know what they're called in a digital camera. They're called pixels. And we measure cameras by how many million pixels they have these days. But having set that aside, let's talk about a master photographer, Ansel Adams, considered one of the best photographers of all time, and the manipulation that he puts us through in having us see this picture. Now, I'm going to tell you that if you hadn't been aware of it, photos are flat. This is a print of the same photo. It's about 1/64 of an inch thick. So the question is, and it's flat there too, of course. The question is, how do you do something that has depth? Because there's about 8 miles from the front of this picture back to the mountains, and it's called the Teton Mountains in the Snake River, taken back in the early 40s. How do you give a sense of depth? Well, I'm going to tell you that there are 3 things in this photo that he does. Number 1 is because he knows this as a landscape photographer, and you'll know it too once I tell you if you don't know it now, is that you put something in the foreground, something in the middle ground, and something in the background. And that takes the eye through the whole depth of the picture. It gives it depth, the illusion of depth. So that's the first thing that you do. The second thing that you do is you put lines in this. Now that I've said the word lines, you see the line that I'm talking about. You may not have been conscious of that line, but your eyes were and your brain was. The line is the river, right? Starts over on the right, it curves almost to the left, back towards the right, and then it goes out of view. But that's not the end of his use of lines here. The other line is very subtle until I point it out to you. You notice the white along the river, the top of the riverbank, and you notice this section of landscape there, that is also a line. So quite honestly, the eye goes through this whole picture in an S. Or I should tell you, it goes to the place where Adams wants us to go ultimately in this picture, and that's the manipulation, because the third thing that he uses is light. So fundamental principle, you're going to have to go look at pictures to prove whether I'm right or wrong. And not all pictures do this, but it's a fundamental picture that if there's something bright in a picture, your eye will go to it. Your eye cannot not go to the bright. And so what's bright in this picture? Well, the river in the center, where the sun is reflecting off of it, the eye goes there. If I could put some kind of a tester on your eye and have it follow, it probably would have gone there first. But there's really nothing to look at there, so it leaves there fairly quickly. And ultimately, it goes to what I think is the focal point in the picture, which is the mountains, where the sun is shining. Now, we've already been led there through the lines in the picture, but just to make sure that we see it, he makes sure that there's light here. Now, did he do this by accident? Was he driving by in the car and he just stuck his camera out the window and took the picture as he went by? The answer is no. There's nothing in this frame that's accidental. That's the nature of Ansel Adams' photography and the nature of manipulation in good photography. I know that he would go back to a place every day for weeks sometimes before he got the right light and the right look for the picture. And I'll say more about this a little bit later, too. So there's that kind of manipulation. Let's talk about a form of manipulation that's probably a little more malicious. Pete Souza is the official White House photographer. He's been that for the last several administrations. He was in Watertown a year and a half ago when Barack Obama was here. I took this picture and I photoshopped it. You probably can see what I did. I made our president whiter on the left and darker on the right. And the reason I did this is that there was a study that was done back in 2008, and they took a cross-section of American voters, potential voters, who were white, and they showed them the white Barack Obama, or the paler Barack Obama, and asked, would you vote for this man, or could you vote for this man? And then they took another representative sample of white voters and showed them the dark one, and asked the same question. Guess what? More people said they'd vote for the paler Barack Obama than for the darker one. Now, draw your own conclusions about that. I'm not here to talk about race. But the people that did the study weren't the only ones that are aware of this. The John McCain campaign, he was the one that was running against Obama in 2008. The John McCain campaign knew that that's how white voters responded to a black man. And so they made Barack Obama really black. As a matter of fact, a study was done of all of the campaign ads that were done by the McCain campaign. And as the campaign went on, Barack Obama got blacker and John McCain got whiter. You know, we can smile at that, but it's also a little bit disturbing to think that we can do that with photography. So that's manipulation. It didn't work. McCain didn't get elected. So now let's talk about one last form of manipulation that I think you're probably familiar with, and it's called Photoshop. I know that sometimes people look at a photo and say, well, you Photoshopped that, didn't you? And if anybody asks me that, I'm thinking, well, then I failed. Yes, I Photoshop every picture I do in some form. But if you know it, then I'm not manipulating you. It was a really, 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 really cold winter night. Sounds like the beginning of a story, doesn't it? And I was looking for a place to take a picture of a lunar eclipse, and I finally hit upon these trees. It was so cold that I didn't want to get out of the car. Ansel Adams would have not been proud of me. And so I rolled the window down and I took this picture. And I knew that compositionally there were some problems with the picture. The little tree in the foreground is distracting. Because the trees get higher to the right, the picture is kind of heavy to the right, and the moon is in the wrong place. So what did I do? Well, I got rid of the tree and I moved the moon. Don't you love godlike powers when it comes to Photoshop? Well, is there something wrong with that? No, I don't think so. Now, if I'm a journalist, there's a whole different standard, but occasionally I try to be an artist. Ansel Adams, when he got done with that picture that I showed you, when he got done taking it, he spent days printing hundreds of prints, doing all kinds of things in the darkroom to get it just right. In fact, Ansel Adams didn't talk about taking a picture. He used the phrase, when I make a picture. And I like that idea. So you can say that it's your world when it comes to being manipulated, or when it comes that it's your world, but when it comes to being manipulated, I would say it's not just your world, especially when photographers get involved. So finally, what about photography as art? Now, in order to answer this question, I'm going to advance two definitions of art. They're very simple. The first definition is art is a creative expression, period. If a tree falls in the forest and a photographer there is there to take a picture that is somehow creative and expressive of that tree falling in the forest, and he never shows anybody that picture, is it art? Well, according to that definition, yeah, it's art. That's definition number one. Definition number two is it's a creative expression with the explicit intent to cause a reaction. There you have it. Having given you those definitions, I'm going to show you 5 pictures that I've taken. Now, I'm not going to tell you that they're art. I'm not even going to tell you that they're good pictures. They're pictures that I like. And I believe that a photo should speak for itself, say a whole lot as we look at these pictures. I call this one Three's Company. A helping hand. It's my nephew and his newborn son, Ethan, who I am told today is about 9 years old now. After the rain. Enigma. I don't know these three women, and I did not pose them, and they did not know that I was there. Now that may be creepy, but I heard someone say it, so I'll say it too. I call this one Late Spring Snow on Iron Creek. What do you see? What do you think? What do you hear? And how do you feel? Well, I can't tell you, because after all, it's your world. John, I can't think of his last name right now, who was the director of art, of photography at the Museum of Modern Art in New York for about 30 years, who was an acquaintance of Ansel Adams, and this is an Adams picture, said that Ansel Adams was an artist, and on his best days, he was a terrific artist. There it is. Well, I'm going to throw out one more remixed definition of art, and it is this. Art is reality, but it's your reality mixed with the photographer's reality, those two things together, along with the manipulation, friendly and not malicious in any way, of the photographer, and you might end up with something that is art. My photography is very much about my world. Now, I'm going to tell you that at age 12, I got my first camera, but I also just circumstantially read a book when I was 12 years old about the life of Michelangelo, and I thought, well, that's cool. I want to be a great artist, too. And I took a few painting lessons. My parents hid the paintings when I brought them home. And they were worth hiding, I'll tell you. I never realized at the time that that camera that I had been given could be my path to art. And I told you that my photography is very much about my world. It's the first definition. It's creative expression. But as I've gotten older, what I realize is that for me to be the kind of artist I wanted to be when I was 12 years old, I need you, all of you. Because I think that that kind of art takes my world and your world, and it merges them together. We bring our own experiences into this kind of thing. And so in the end, it's not my world, and it's not your world. I would suggest to you that it's really, when it comes to photography, it's really our world.